You guys hear that? Sounds like somebody left the door open. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of QnA. My name is Quincy. This is the show where I take your questions from YouTube and answer them here on this show. And this is the post-Week 14 edition. As we jump into Week 15, I'm going to jump into some of your questions. And today I feel like starting with CKB Highlights, who says, do you think that we should focus on more the secondary or the defense in the offseason? Love the vids, Quincy. I would say, that's a tough one. The defensive line to me. And that is because I get the secondary feels like a more of a need. But it's also more difficult to find, pieces to fit in there. And while the defensive line doesn't seem like that much of a need, it's much easier and much cheaper to just overload your defensive line, especially in the interior, and hope that you get enough pressure to kind of alleviate some of the issues that you have in the secondary. I think that's the more economical solution. I think that's the solution that the Browns are going to go with going forward, because the big solutions in the secondary are just super expensive. When you're talking about free safety, strong safety, maybe you bring back somebody like Ronnie Harrison on a decent deal. Free safety, I don't know what the solution is going to be there. Maybe Grant Delpit can get back in time. But there's really no cheap option when it comes to anything in the secondary. But the defensive line, especially in the interior, you can get some real good players, real cheap, to just add a ton of depth to this defensive line so you can have a relentless one, so you can get enough pressure to kind of help your secondary grow. So if that makes sense, that's my answer. I think it is more important to go with the defensive line, not because the need is bigger at defensive line, but because you can be more resourceful with the defensive line during a free agency period, because there's ultimately always going to be more good defensive linemen available than DBs. And since that's the case, the defensive linemen are always going to be cheaper. Next question comes from Mark JAR, who says, everybody is talking about Cleveland's chances to make the playoffs. What would have to happen after this week for the Browns to miss the playoff? They would have to lose out. So you're talking about losing against the Jets and obviously against Pittsburgh. And then everybody would have to win out, or at least, everybody would have to win out. Or a scenario could rise where, like, Miami wins out, Baltimore wins out, and then, one of the three teams that you beat, so one of the AFC South teams, gets 11 wins instead of 10 wins, so that doesn't break the tiebreaker, and that's how the Browns could be left out. So Baltimore and Miami winning out, and then one of the AFC South teams, or both of the AFC South teams, because one of them is going to win a division if they have the higher record, so they'll be out of the tiebreaker. So both of the AFC South teams would also have to win out as well, so they don't tiebreak with the Cleveland Browns. So you'd be talking about at least 11 wins for both AFC South teams, and then winning out for both Miami in Baltimore, and that would get the Browns out of the playoffs, so to speak. Or if they all get to 10 wins, that would get the Browns out the playoffs. So that's the kind of scenario that could keep the Browns out of the playoffs. Obviously, it's actually a lot more complicated to think of a scenario on how the Browns couldn't make it than how they could, because the scenario for how they could is obvious. They went out, they're in, or they win, and one of the three teams, anybody really, Tennessee, Indy, Baltimore, or Miami, loses, they're in. They're clinched. They don't have to worry. So they get to 11 and one of those things happens, they clinch. But if they don't win the next two games and then something else happens, then the Browns won't make it. So Browns are in a pretty good position here when you're talking about clinching scenarios being much, much, much more simple than your non-clinching scenarios. This question comes from Vidge, who says, do you think Baker should run the ball more? He's been quite confident in his running in recent games. Absolutely, because running the ball does a couple of things. One, gets you positive yards. So on first and second down, that's always a good thing, right? Even if the scramble's only for 4 or 5 yards, you get those positive yards. Also, If you run, you're obviously not going to throw an interception. And also, it keeps the defense honest. One of the things I noticed while watching the tape in this last game that the Browns had, where they ran a lot of like RPO runs out the shotgun, it was interesting how honest the New York Giants had to play that when it comes to Baker Mayfield keeping the ball. So that helps the run game. Obviously, it does a lot of things. And even Baker, with his limited speed, still has to be respected a little bit as a runner because people know he can scramble a little bit. So those are all good things. And that's why it's a good thing that Baker is running more because, again, if you could scramble for a few yards, more productive than a regular check down, or I mean, not a check down, but it's more productive than just throwing the ball away. You gain yards and you don't throw an interception. So all three positive things. That's why it's really good that Baker Mayfield can do that. That's why you're seeing a lot of teams transition to guys who can at least do that at the bare minimum. The next question comes from Chris Hoying, who says, going into the playoffs, who would you rather play first, a team like the Bills or the Titans again, or something else? What is your ideal playoff scenario? I don't know if I have an ideal playoff scenario. I would ideally like to see how people are playing when it comes to getting into week 17 and everything. The logical part of me says you want to play Pittsburgh because they're playing awful right now. I mean, they just lost to Cincinnati. But, you know, just playing Pittsburgh 2 times in a row, that just seems super weird. I don't like that. The team I would like to play is either the Titans or the Bills just because they don't have strong defensive lines. And I think a strong defensive line is probably the worst matchup for the Cleveland Browns, not because they don't have a good offensive line, but when they're able to dominate the line of scrimmage with that really good offensive line, then that's when they're able to be unstoppable on the offensive side of the ball and really dictate the game that way. I think they have their best chance to win against teams that don't have strong defensive lines. So I would prefer that. That's why I wouldn't prefer a team like Baltimore in the first round or Pittsburgh in the first round, a team that can really blitz, if anything else, because then you can worry about the offense just a tad bit more than you would against a team like Tennessee or a team like Buffalo who really doesn't get pressure with their defensive line per se. So that's what I would say about the playoffs right now, but hey, still got to get in there, still got to win the game against the Jets. Don't want to overlook anything. Next game comes from Jeff, who says, "Hey Q, greetings from Belgium. First and foremost, love the show. Great stuff you are doing. What do you think Baker's ceiling is and which skills will get him to an all-star, like a Pro Bowl level? What will stay a weakness for the rest of his career?" That's so hard to say right now as far as like where his ceiling is because I thought I knew his ceiling or had a grasp on his ceiling about 4 weeks ago. I don't think I have a grasp on what his ceiling could be. He has the potential to be a really good quarterback. How good? I have no idea. Like, I think we got to let this season play out to know what his potential ceiling is. And what skills will get him. I think he already has all the skills, all the talent to get him to that kind of Pro Bowl level. He just has to execute and put more film up so people kind of trust it more than they do right now. And as far as weaknesses go for Baker, that's going to be the lack of like elite athleticism at the quarterback position. That's probably going to be one. And, you know, I guess height can be a thing because sometimes he has to maneuver a lot to find a passing window, or sometimes he can't throw to the wide open man because he just doesn't have a passing window available to him, so the ball would get batted down. That doesn't happen that often. Bat downs happen on short passes more than they happen on long passes. Baker throws a ton of deep balls, so it doesn't happen to him often, but it is something you have to worry about. The marginal athleticism, not marginal, but, you know, he just doesn't have elite athleticism. That's something that is a little bit of a concern, but he doesn't have fatal flaws like it seemed like he had in 2019, where the interceptions just continued to pile up, and it looked like he kind of just got into modes where he couldn't help himself but throw a ton of interceptions. So now that it seems, and cross your fingers, that he's over that and that's not going to be a continuing thing with him throughout his career, hopefully, that tells me that he doesn't really have those fatal flaws. He has smaller flaws that he can work on, but as long as you're a quarterback and you don't have many fatal flaws, you're going to be fine. The next question comes from my guy, Samuel Didden, who says, When can we expect to see Marvin Hall? I mean, Kevin Stefanski is pretty steadfast. He waits to bring people along. He waits like a month to bring dudes along. So I have no idea. I think they could have used him last week. But, Kevin has his routine. Kevin has his system. He does it how Kevin likes it. And you know what? How can I argue with those results? So I don't think you're probably going to see Marvin Hall till probably the end of the season. I'm talking like the Pittsburgh game at the earliest, maybe somewhere in the playoffs, but probably not. I think there was a window to incorporate him and get him some snaps in the regular season. I think we're starting to pass that window. I think New York was his opportunity to get his snaps and, make an impact in that way. But I could be wrong. He could get a ton of snaps against the Jets, which is entirely possible. The next question comes from Mike Wack, who says, "Hey, Q, love your vids. Keep up the good work. I want to know your thoughts on Cody Parkey lately because he's become the new whipping boy in Cleveland since Sendejo is out." It's interesting. Y'all got mad at me for turning on Austin Seibert in the offseason after only 1 year. And after one extra point missed, that was like a 40-yard extra point, you guys are starting to turn on him. Now, he had the 2 missed field goals in Baltimore. I do think it's unfair to blame losing the game on Cody Parkey, my bad. Because, yes, if he does make those field goals very early on in the game, you do technically, if you just add those points, you win the game. But that doing that is not as simple as it seems. It changes up how John Harbaugh is going to approach, how Lamar is going to approach. Who knows? Maybe they get those points back eventually. It's very hard to play that type of game there. The fact of the matter with that game on Monday night against the Ravens is the defense gets that stop on 3rd and 10, you win the game. That's who you blame the ball game on. They didn't get the stop on Trace McSorley on 3rd and 10. They lose the game. I don't feel right blaming that on Cody Parkey. And the reason I don't feel right blaming that on Cody Parkey is that he had been excellent up until this point. He misses a couple kicks. He gets a 40-yard extra point, and he couldn't have been anticipating that because of a weird confluences of penalties for a taunt that I didn't even see happen with Jarvis Landry. And all of a sudden, he's kicking a 45-yard extra point. He misses it. Okay, that's not a big deal. I just need Cody Parkey to make the 15-yard extra points. If he can do that, we're fine. I don't think the Browns should be in a ton of positions to where they're begging their field goal kicker to keep him in the game. This is not the days where we desperately needed Phil Dawson to be able to stay afloat on offense. If the offense was as bad as the defense is, yeah, I would be worried about that. But if that were the case, the Browns wouldn't be in the playoffs. So that being said, when you have a quarterback, when you have Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, you would be more upset that you don't get the ball in the end zone than, if you miss the field goal. That there has to be 2 huge mistakes compounded on each other to even get to Cody Parkey being important. And also, I haven't lost faith in the guy yet. He's just missed a couple of extra points. He missed the 1 field goal. It was a pretty bad field goal miss, but also he held up pretty well in 45-degree winds. So he has experience with the stadium. He had kicked there for like 2 years. At this point, I don't want to bring somebody new in to kick these extra points. So it's going to be Cody Parkey. And I don't think he deserves all the scorn that he has gotten because he has just had a run of bad luck. And I don't think we should pile on because I think that has a history of just ruining young kickers. You look at Zane Gonzalez, who's actually had a solid career after he left Cleveland. He kind of got booed out of town because of those inexcusable misses that he had at the beginning of the season. Now the Browns kind of missed out on a good kicker. They had to mess around with Austin Seibert for a year. It's just not a great deal. So I'm be patient with Cody Parkey. I get it. He got the double dunk and all this stuff, but honest to God, we just need him to make extra points. If he starts bonking regular extra points, then that's when I'm going to be upset. That's what got me upset about Austin Seibert was at 87% on extra points. That's unacceptable. If he misses some 30, 40-yard field goals, I can live with that every once in a while. Kickers aren't going to go perfect on that. But the extra points, the regular extra points without penalties, yeah, he's got to make those. He hasn't missed enough of those for me to start to be concerned. This next question comes from Mark, who says, thoughts on the Jets winning their first and hopefully final win, and thoughts on the QB class. Well, congratulations to the Jets. I don't wish 0-16 on anybody. I said that multiple times on this channel. And thoughts on this QB class, the 2018 QB class, really good QB class, 3 franchise quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Baker Mayfield. This year's QB class, buyer beware. Buyer beware. Trevor Lawrence is a great prospect. I personally, and I'm alone on this apparently, but I personally think that he does have some flaws in his game. He's not, the Andrew Luck type prospect that can just thrive in any type of system, or Joe Burrow type prospect that can thrive no matter what's around him. He's definitely somebody who's going to need to be put in the right system. I think he's more akin to a Josh Allen than he is Andrew Luck. And I think people are looking at him like an Andrew Luck. He's not an Andrew Luck. Everybody else in that draft class, fool's gold. I would not draft Justin Fields. I like Trey Lance. Not enough film on him. And then he didn't get that Oregon game, so you don't get that, Power 5 film on a guy like Trey Lance. So he's going to be all combine and that. And then once you get to that level, it gets weird. There's that Zach guy out of BYU. Don't like him that much. Haven't watched him enough. Look, I'm not a quarterback draft guru, so take my word with a grain of salt. I didn't think Patrick Mahomes would be good coming out of college, but I think Trevor Lawrence is obviously the best quarterback prospect in this year's draft class, and there's really not that many other great prospects. I mean, I know a lot of people cheer for Ohio State who watch me. I'm not a big fan of Justin Fields as a pro prospect. I think he has a lot of issues when it comes to his game transferring to the NFL level, and I don't like the resume and the numbers he's put up against ranked teams at Ohio State. It just has not been what you would expect of somebody you think could really be good on the next level. But hey, he could develop into somebody. You never know, right? Again, I thought Patrick Mahomes would be a bust. So take what I say about quarterbacks in college with a grain of salt. It is not my forte or area of expertise. The next question comes from Bodie Cook, who says, how about them Steelers? How about those Steelers? Lost to the Bengals, opened up the door. Now the Cleveland Browns, and it's a lot more realistic than when the door got opened up in the first place. But if the Browns can beat the Jets and the Colts can beat the Steelers, which I'm kind of nervous about because that is a home game for the Steelers. They still got an opportunity. They're not a terrible team. If those two things happen, then, oh, my God, you're going to have a massive game Sunday, Week 17, probably on NBC. Browns-Steelers for the AFC North Championship. This is what that game against Baltimore on Monday Night Football was trying to prepare you for. Games like that. And that will be a great primer before you go into the playoffs. See if you're really about it. You get that game, you win that game, now you're in a real good position. Next question comes from Lydia, who says, what do you think about Baker's comparisons to Elway and subsequent backlash because he was compared to such a legend? I get when people hear it, right? Baker Mayfield compared to John Elway. People immediately and instinctually freak out. And that's not, I don't think that's like unfair, right? I think that's fair. When you hear that comparison without any context, you're like, that's ridiculous, right? And because when you think of John Elway, you think of the physical specimen, right? You think of the 6'5" guy, 235, the original template for somebody like an Andrew Luck, somebody we think of as the, bionic QB nowadays. Like that was John Elway, the prototypical modern, marvel at quarterback. That's what a lot of people think when they think of John Elway. Baker Mayfield, on the other hand, people don't think of that way. Even though he does have the arm strength, he is very mobile, he has all this talent, it doesn't come in a package that looks like, a John Elway or somebody who should be compared to John Elway, right? Because he's 6'1", he's a walk-on at Texas Tech and then walked on to Oklahoma. He's somebody people see as a grinder, an intangible guy, a guy with moxie. People talk about all the other stuff with Baker Mayfield, all the intangible stuff, so much that it seems like you're talking about a dude with the skill set to get drafted like in the 5th or 6th round, or as an undrafted guy who has like a Gardner Minshew, right? That's how people talk about Baker Mayfield's personality, and that's how you think of Baker Mayfield. But in reality, Baker has one of the strongest arms in the NFL in an era that is filled with historically strong arms. Yeah, I'm talking about Josh Allen, who has a freaking cannon, Patrick Mahomes, who has a legendary cannon. Baker Mayfield's right up there when it comes to arm strength. Some people think he has better arm strength. I think mechanically he's much more sound than the other two, but off of just raw talent alone and just like arm strength, nobody compares to what Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen can do. Those guys have unreal arm strength. So I get it when you hear that comparison, it's crazy. But when you kind of get some nuance and some context of what Chris Collinsworth was saying, I think it becomes a lot more reasonable, because what Chris Collinsworth was saying wasn't Baker Mayfield and John Elway are the same player. It's Baker Mayfield and John Elway have a lot of similarities when it comes to their mechanics specifically. And that's true. John Elway is an all-time great because he not only had it there physically, he also had it there mechanically. Baker Mayfield, he is somebody who has struggled with his mechanics here and there, but when he's on, his mechanics are always crystal, perfect. Like his rookie year, he had great mechanics. You jump to 2019, terrible mechanics, and then now he has pretty good mechanics. So I think that was the comparison. I think that got lost among everything, and I get it, right? Because the image you have of a John Elway when it comes to athletic prowess and a Baker Mayfield are completely different for reasons that are kind of unfair to Baker Mayfield, because that's just how people talk about Baker. They highlight the stuff that doesn't really go around his athletic ability. They don't really mention he's a Heisman Trophy winner. He's a all-time passing leader, that he has one of the strongest arms in the NFL. So people just think of him like a Gardner Minshew. But Baker, make no mistake about it, has one of the strongest arms in the NFL. And if this weren't the crazy era that we're in with the amount of arm strength that's just out there, he would have the strongest arm in the NFL. Like, he was compared to Brett Favre for a reason, because he does have that mobility and insane arm talent. So I get why people freaked out when they first heard it, but I to be fair to Chris Collinsworth, I think it made a lot more sense than people were willing to see the context on, but I also get why people would hear that and get incredulous. But that's it for all the questions. Again, guys, thank you for asking them, and have a great day. Have a good night.